Good evening, old friends and new friends, and welcome to the screening of my documentary. I'm Scott Franklin, and I'd like to thank you personally for your attendance. This film was produced as part of my final year project. It contains footage that some viewers may find gross and disturbing, and fictional characterizations that are not based on real life figures. I must point out that zombies are not real. The diseases contained within this documentary, however, are real. All of the scientific accounts of how they cause disease in the human body are real. All of the accounts of zombies are not real. If you no longer wish to participate in this screening, please leave now. Otherwise, kindly shut your mouths and enjoy my film. Do you have a zombie survival plan? Chances are that you do, and chances are that you're pretty proud of your foresight in planning for the event that will possibly wipe out most of the population, according to many films and television shows. I'm Chad Boxworthy, and tonight we'll be talking about the real-life possibilities of a disease turning you into a shambling plague factory that'll eat the face off of your grandmother and tear your sister to pieces. And we'll be discussing why that event will never ever happen. Earlier this week, our crews took to the streets to find out what the public had to say when confronted with the idea of the shambolic dead.
Zombies, right? I'm not saying that they do exist, but if they don't exist, then why is there so many films about them? I'm ready for the zombie apocalypse. I'm in the process of getting myself a gun license, and for the past 4 months I've been stealing provisions off of work. With diseases like MRSA and that existing, why couldn't it happen? Why couldn't it happen, mate? What, zombies? Well, it's all government, isn't it? Government's covering it up. Ha! Zombies. I think you mean the mass consumerist market there.
Zombies, walkers, rage-infected. Films, television and video games are the main source of your information on zombies. Films like The Night of the Living Dead, Zombieland and Shaun of the Dead, not to mention the popularization of comics through TV shows like The Walking Dead, are tediously saturating the media and making the average slack-jawed and highly gullible masses think that zombies are actually something to worry about.
So, before we commence with the no doubt boring science, spoiler alert, it's really gross and fun, what actually is a zombie and where do they come from?
Zombies appear to be something that's been deeply ingrained on the human psyche for thousands of years. They exist in all folklores, on all continents, amongst all cultures and creeds, be they the Norse Draugr or the Central European ghoul. Zombies exist as an image that permeates society, an image of terror and disgust.
From a medical standpoint, the zombie disease that's presented in so many films and television shows is spread by bite and ultimately leads to death and then reanimation over a variable time frame of a couple of minutes to 24 hours. The disease presents with fever and malaise, ultimately resulting in paralysis, coma, death, and then subsequent reanimation. So far in the history of the human race, there's not been an outbreak of a disease that is equivocal to the zombie disease. The only thing that's come close in recent years is the apparent use of bath salts, which results in antisocial drug-related psychotic behaviour, including flesh-eating and biting that makes the poor, hopped-up fool act like a zombie, but not actually a zombie. Zombies in appearance are highly damaged human beings with blood dripping from their mouths, sunken eyes, damaged skin, highly necrotic and shambling. They can't coordinate their movements and so shuffle around like old people boxed into a post office. They stink and are rotting as a result of secondary bacterial infections that result in tissue rot and the smell that comes from this. According to films, the only way to kill a zombie is to shoot it in the head, as extensive and graphic bodily mutilation results in nothing more than a creature that is slightly more grotesque.
So there is no zombie virus, and there is no disease that will turn you into a zombie. There are, however, many real-life diseases that have marked similarities to some of the attributes displayed by the zombie virus. Tonight, we will be discussing those diseases. Zombies in films are shown to absorb quite a lot of physical damage, but how could this be possible in the really real world? The answer? Leprosy.
Leprosy is caused by a slow-growing bacterium known as Mycobacterium leprae. It's a small, cigar-shaped bacteria that groups together with its friends into arrangements that look like packs of cigarettes. Leprosy is very much a disease of antiquity, with it being prominent in the Bible, where they thought it was caused by sin.
Despite being a so-called disease of antiquity, leprosy is still a problem in the developing world. In 2010, there were 211,000 cases that resulted in death. It's still a major problem in Africa, Brazil, and India.
There are two main types of leprosy, tuberculoid and lepratimus. Tuberculoid is caused by the immune system running rampant after an infection. However, lepratimus is caused by the bacteria saying, you know what, screw you, and hijacking the immune cells, riding them around on the inside like they're some kind of zombie drone, causing all sorts of damage to the body, and also calling them leper cells to undermine their confidence.
Ironic.
Both diseases present in the same way, with nasty skin lesions being the main symptom. As the infection gets worse, the skin lesions redden, swell up, and burst, ulcerating, basically not healing well and staying as an open wound. There's also fever, a sense of malaise, loss of appetite, and facial swelling. Lepratimus, however, is somehow worse.
With lepratimus or type 2 leprosy, you'll present with episcleritis and uveitis, which essentially makes your eyes terrifying and bloodshot and a bit scary. You may also develop arthritis, which will make you move in a pained and disjointed shambling manner, kind of like a zombie. But what are these specific target cells, and why does any of this really happen?
Well, the target cells in leprosy are nerve cells, small vessels, and the immune system. In the nerve cells, it targets a specific type of cell, called a Schwann cell, that acts like a living, aggressive condom that coats the main body of the nerve, protecting it against invading infection. It targets endothelial cells that lead to the nasty lesions, and then hijacks the immune cells.
The immune cells in question are called macrophages. It's their job to patrol the body, acting as mindless Pac-Man police that release chemicals to attract the bigger, stronger immune cells to help them out. They are the ones that activate the inflammation in the epithelioid layer, which leads to the formation of the lesions. In these lesions, if you separate the macrophages and look at them rather closely with a microscope, you'll see that they've actually got the bacteria inside them in little bubbles.
It gets inside because the macrophage tries to eat it, but it doesn't realize that the bacterium is covered in a protective coat made up of a substance called phenolic acid. So the stupid cell has eaten the bacteria, but it's not died. Parts of it have been a little bit digested, and as a result, the macrophage ends up being the bacterium zombie slave bitch.
These macrophages are special, and they are known as CD4 plus T cells. It's their job, other than eating things, to go around telling cells that are infected that they should kill themselves. This leads to massive surface destruction, leading ultimately to the lesions.
But what's this really got to do with zombies absorbing physical damage?
Leprosy, however, can't be considered just a simple skin disease, but also a chronic neurological disorder. A disease of the nervous system. It infects Schwann cells, as mentioned, and it does this by using a surface protein called PGL1. The bacterium uses this to get into the Schwann cell, to let it get inside. Imagine how you buy that stuck-up girl at the bar, 15 Jack and Cokes, or how you grind up the pills and hide them in the kid's food. Well, that's the principle here. You know, Look at this. Oh, you like this? Let me inside.
The Schwann cell binds to PGL1 using something called laminin alpha 2 chains. Imagine that the Schwann cell has two free hands. One reaches out and grabs hold of the bacterium. This pulls it in so that it can bind with a protein called dystroglycan, the free and empty hand grabbing hold now, and then the Schwann cell swallows the bacterium whole.
The Schwann cell then breaks off some of the proteins from the bacterium, spin them out for the immune system, which then sees them and realizes that the cell is infected, and starts pumping out all of those emo go kill yourself chemicals, whilst pumping out chemokines. You know, the chemicals that get all of its immune system friends to come round and help it kick the hell out of that infected cell.
So what resulted in skin lesions as a result of damage to the endothelial cells here results in massive nerve damage, because instead of having an open wound on the surface of the skin, the same thing is happening to the nerve cells.
This damage mostly takes place in the peripheral nerve cells, so the nerves in your arms and around your body. One of the common misconceptions about leprosy is that you literally start falling apart. Obviously, that's wrong. What happens is that people with leprosy just carry on doing normal things. But unlike you or me, when they cut themselves or bash themselves or pick up something scalding that burns them really badly, they just carry on because they simply can't feel it. All of this bruising and bashing and damage builds up and secondary infections can get in. But they just don't feel it. They carry on like there's nothing wrong at all. It's kind of like when you cut your hand really badly and it's bleeding all over the place, but you don't realize it. Give one of your close friends a hug and leave them looking a bit like a used tampon.
28 Days Later, right, was basically this movie where these mad scientists made some horrible disease called the rage virus in these monkeys that a group of activists then let out that basically caused a big spread of a disease which made people into zombie things, puking blood up on each other's faces. It was right nasty. Oh, and it also had Cillian Murphy's Willy in it. In 1967, in a German lab in Marburg, a deadly new disease was discovered, the Marburg virus. This disease caused enterohemorrhagic fever, which means that you get rather warm and bleed from all orifices. In 1976, a deadlier and easier to pronounce disease broke out in the Sudan, the Ebola virus.
Ebola is a filovirus. That means that unlike other viruses that are microscopic spiky balls, Ebola is long and thin like spaghetti. Only, unlike spaghetti, it will probably kill you. When you get Ebola, it starts off like flu. You feel nauseous and tired and run down. But once it properly kicks in, that's when you start to bleed from every available hole.
The Ebola virus gets into your cells by a complex series of events. It has a special spike on its surface that is like a key with a grappling hook attached to it called viral glycoprotein that helps it to attach to the cells that it wants to get into. The hook attaches to a structure called NPC1, and then the cell swallows the virus into a bubble known as a vacuole.
In cells there are lysosomes filled with hydrolytic enzymes, basically bubbles full of acid that break down whatever's inside the vacuole. This is usually a trigger that causes the virus to be released into the cell where it can wreak its devilish havoc.
With Ebola, the vacuole binds to lysosomes. The grappling hook gets melted away, leaving the key which then unlocks the vacuole, releasing the virus into the cell. Here Ebola replicates rapidly, hijacking the cell's own machinery to replicate its proteins and genetic information, making thousands of copies of itself, before leaving the cell by ripping chunks out of its surface so that it can try and hide from the immune system.
Viral budding and the subsequent tearing of plasma membranes causes cell death, leading to substantial tissue damage that leads to the bleeding. As it infects surfaces, it will infect the insides of your blood vessels and your intestines. You get low blood pressure and your body goes into shock, and ultimately your organs start shutting down, resulting in death.
So what does this mean for Ebola virus's potential to cause a zombie virus?
The speed of replication and how quickly it spreads throughout the human body could be representative of how quickly a zombie disease could take over a person. Also, the number of viral particles in infected blood and fluids that comes from a person could be representative of how somebody might contract zombieism.
However, while Ebola is a deadly disease, Diseases that replicate that fast and that are that destructive to the human body really means that it will kill the host far too quickly for anything like zombieism to happen. The actual outbreaks of Ebola have been really well contained, with relatively few people actually getting it, and only a couple out of the 15 or so dying.
It's nothing to realistically worry about because it's only spread through direct, intimate contact with fluids from an infected person. And it's not an airborne virus like flu. And that doesn't even take into account the fact that outbreaks mainly occur in sub-Saharan Africa, and elsewhere only as minor lab accidents.
So unless you're travelling to Central Africa or importing exotic foreign pets because you're a proper mental case that's unsatisfied with the normal company of normal domestic animals, Ebola isn't really something to be worrying about. However, how can sex turn you into a mindless zombie?
Syphilis is a particularly nasty STI. It's caused by a bacterial infection caused by Treponema pallidum. It first started to spread across Europe during the 15th century, starting out in Italy after the return of Christopher Columbus from the New World.
Initial infection manifests as a canker, an ulcerated wound that's open and disgusting, a wound that won't heal easily right at the site of infection. What's worse is that the primary infection occurs as a result of intimate sexual contact with a sore, which really brings into question certain tastes of people.
In women, the sores are most commonly found internally on the cervix. That's right up inside your flesh cave. But for men, it's usually located on the penile shaft. Sores can also appear anally and rectally, dependent upon what you like and how deep you like it.
Syphilis is still highly responsive to penicillin, and a simple course of antibiotics takes care of the infection nowadays. Historically, without antibiotics, it was a big problem, because not only could it spread sexually, it could also be passed from mothers to child whilst they were pregnant. But it was pretty much eradicated in the 50s.
However, there is a resurgence of syphilis in these super modern times. It's a problem amongst people who've got HIV, and as a result, is apparently common in homosexual communities. But it's not just limited to them. Straight people are also getting it, a lot more than gay people. As the resurgent epidemic is hitting China, where confused farmers who've moved to the big bright cities apparently don't know how to have safe sex. It's also a problem in South Africa.
Well, the sore persists for up to around 6 weeks, and then you might get a bit of a rash that can turn into nasty swollen pustules known as granulomas. But once they clear up, the infection enters a latent stage where there aren't any symptoms. You can see how people can just carry on having sex without worry. But that's wrong, because what comes after the latent period can be the most horrendous thing to happen other than scabby private parts. But how can syphilis persist in the human body if the immune system can easily deal with it? Johannes van Venderen from the South African division of the World Organization of Health has some answers.
Well, Treponema pallidum is known as the Great Mimicker because when it leaves cells, it steals an envelope of proteins and membrane from the cell, wrapping itself in a bubble of bits from the host that help it to hide from the host's immune system. It's kind of like if you tried to get into a nightclub with a fake ID and the bouncer won't let you in. So you go and you cut off someone's face and take their ID and use that to get in. Because for some reason, he doesn't realise that you're the same person, just wearing someone else's face. The bloody idiot.
There are many tertiary symptoms and conditions that may develop after latent syphilis has set in. It's when everything goes to pot, around 3 to 5 years after you've gotten over the spotty phase. You can develop these fleshy lumps called gummas as part of gummatous syphilis, or it can attack your heart as part of cardiovascular syphilis, or it can attack your thinking box. However, when active, Treponema pallidum causes an immune response from cells known as CD8 plus cells that try to eliminate the infection, but in doing so, do a lot more damage to the host cells. The damage to the brain causes dementia,
delusions, lightning pains, incapacitates the ability to focus properly when looking at things, and causes massive personality disturbance. It eats away at your brain, turning you into a delusional, aggressive creature that doesn't really know what it's doing.
Now, doesn't that sound familiar?
However, it takes at least 10 years for syphilis to reach neurosyphilis, where you become zombie-like. Syphilis rarely gets to this stage, and people developing it are in the minority, although it's a problem in South Africa. In the developed world, you'll probably get a sore and you're like, and then go to the doctors immediately, where do some simple microscopic tests, and we'll show that you have the condition, and then you'll just be given some antibiotics, and that'll be that. So, in conclusion, Johannes, take it away. So syphilis shouldn't be a problem as long as you check your sexual partner's crotch for nasty oozy sores. Or if you're too drunk, or it's too dark, wrap your sausage before the act brew. Just wear a condom and you shouldn't get it.
If you grew up in the 90s, which you probably did, and if you didn't, then you probably remember this better, you lived in fear of eating beef, lest your brain suddenly started melting, and you became a jabbering mess.
Rick Bullshine here. Tensions rise as the cases of mad cow disease rise. Scientists say that the condition known as BSE, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, is transmissible to human beings. As cases rise in the UK, is this the end for Britain and farming as we know it? I thought it was weird that me cows were like stumbling about in that, but I just chalked it up to them being a bit pissed like. But apparently scientists are saying that it's a disease that humans can get, so I should probably start fucking them then.
Britain is boycotting French beef as old tensions arise, but will there be any end to the troubles caused by mad cow disease?
Spongiform encephalopathies are a rather nasty group of conditions known as prion diseases. Prions are interesting little things. They are proteins that exist in the brain normally and don't really do anything much. But if you ingest a diseased prion, which is a broken prion that's been mutated, then it screws the whole process up.
The protein-only hypothesis was met by a rather confused scientific community, because up until this point everybody had just assumed that it was spread by a virus. However, the reality was much scarier. The mutant prion protein gets into the brain and somehow tricks your own brain cells into making more of the actual mutant broken prion protein.
From what I've been told by scientists, right, it's kind of like Gangnam Style. One person sees it, then somehow he manages to get all his mates to watch it. And then somehow they manage to get all of their mates to watch it. Apart from the fact that, in this case, it's not society and a bloody stupid song, it's your brain. And you're dying.
Once the broken prion is in the system, there's really no stopping it. Normal prions are shaped like springs. However, the broken ones form layers that build up like sheets and form plaques just like in Alzheimer's disease. The normal cellular processes that would break down these plaques don't work here because the prions, the broken ones, are resistant to this process. So it's really a lose-lose situation.
Because of all of this, the brain tissue starts to degenerate and become spongy as vacuoles form all around the brain cells, which certainly isn't something that you want in a brain. The tissue at the front of the brain, the cerebellum, gradually degenerates.
As cerebral function is lost, the patient exhibits signs of behavioural disturbance. Emotions are difficult to control as they lose coherency, hence the mad in mad cow disease. As the disease progresses, they exhibit motor dysfunction, and as they lose this function, they become unstable and shambling, like zombies.
Scary stuff. But these diseases have long been a part of human and sheep history.
Well, sheep develop a prion disease. It's known as scrapie. I know it's not quite as sexy as mad cow disease, but they get it nonetheless. Other than developing BSE and CJD, humans also fall prey to another form of prion disease. Rather insidiously, the Four people of the hill tribes of Papua New Guinea mysteriously started developing this ailment known as kuru as a result of cannibalizing their dead.
So what's the prognosis for prions being the source of a zombie disease?
Poor!
Despite the striking similarities to a zombie disease, as brain function deteriorates and you're unable to move, a shambling corpse-like creature is something that certainly can't come as a result.
The transmission only occurs if you consume the flesh of somebody that's died from the disease, or if you're genetically predisposed to the condition. So it's probably not something to worry about.
Also, it takes months and sometimes even years for the disease to actually manifest. But once it does, then you're screwed. So, swinging another miss there, Zombie Apocalypse. But what about another disease that's worryingly close to home?
Meningitis is a condition that can arise from a viral or a bacterial infection. Neisseria meningitidis is the main and most common cause of bacterial meningitis. Meningitis is the inflammation of the meninges. The meninges is a thin protective skin or membrane that covers the brain and spinal cord, protecting it from infections. The irritation of the meninges causes tiny holes to appear in the surface as cells die, causing fluid to build up in the brain space, putting deadly pressure on your brain.
This damage is caused by your own immune system. When it recognizes spikes on the surface of the bacterium, it releases chemicals called cytokines that try to stop the infection by attracting killer cells that kill everything in the area, localizing the infection. Imagine a town is full of zombies, and the government don't want the disease getting out into the surrounding area. So the military surround the town, and they completely firebomb it, killing the infected and healthy people alike, just to make sure that the disease doesn't spread. Because, that's right, your immune system is an angry, stupid fascist.
So, as the bacteria travel to your brain, they react with cells as they spread, causing a non-blanching rash that won't disappear when you put pressure on it. Once it gets into your blood, it causes fever. When it's in your brain, the pressure causes delirium and sensitivity to light.
Neisseria meningitidis gets in through the nose and throat, and is geared up for getting into the host and making you ill. On the outside, there are these long fibers called pili, which are used to stick onto the cells and can twitch, moving the bacterium around. They help it to wiggle through the coat of mucus that covers these surfaces and get to the cells underneath. Then it uses these specialized proteins called porins, like a pore, that implant into the surface of the cells, essentially poking little holes in them. This causes the cells to take up calcium, which then activates the cell suicide program. This creates a small hole in the cellular layer in either the throat or the nose or wherever it's infected that lets the bacterium get deeper into your system, slowly breaking down everything that it encounters until it eventually works its way into your blood.
The pili are also how the bacteria get into the brain. When they get to the meninges, they unlock the barrier to get in, using the pili to dock to special gaps between the cells called junctional interendothelial complexes. Think of them as ports covering the meninges and the bacteria like a large boat. Here they cause a signal hacking into the gap that causes them to open up, allowing it through. Here they continue to stimulate cytokines and cause the destructive inflammation.
When the concentration of bacteria in the blood gets high enough, that's when meningococcal septicemia sets in. And that's when you're pretty much gonna die. Once this sets in, you've not really got that long until you slip into a coma and die. But there are measures in place that try to prevent this from happening.
If hospitals suspect that you have meningitis, they take blood and grow it up on special agar to confirm that you've got meningitis bacteria in there. But this process is too slow. So from the moment that they suspect meningitis, they start treating with antibiotics. Even if it isn't, just in case. New techniques have been developed though, using PCR, which rapidly copies and detects the DNA of Neisseria meningitidis.
But what are the risk factors? What makes it more likely that you'll develop bacterial meningitis?
Transmission of meningitis has been linked to social interaction. Kissing, hugging, going to the pub more than twice a week, going to university, smoking, all of those kinds of things. Because basically everyone's crawling with all of this nasty, disgusting bacteria. And every person's different because they come from a different place. And their bacteria are different because of the places that they come from. They're called serotypes, which basically means that they've got different little blocks on the surface, even though they're the same bacteria, which basically tricks your immune system into going, bloody hell, what's that? It's kind of like when you go down the pub and you see a bloke from school that you've not seen in years, and you kind of think that you know him, but you don't really know him. He's lost a load of weight, he's grown a beard, but by the end of the evening, when he suddenly made you vomit all over the place, you go, bloody hell, that's Jeff.
So ultimately, meningitis is something to be wary of, but shouldn't really cause too much worry unless you get it. A vaccine was developed, and you've probably had that vaccine, so it's unlikely that you'll contract meningitis. If you suspect that somebody has meningitis, then it's important to immediately contact the emergency services. Because you've been around them, you'll probably be put on a prophylactic course of antibiotics as well, just to make sure that you don't get the meningitis.
So remember, vomiting, headache, want to sit in the dark, non-blanching rash, fever, phone 999.
So what's all this about then? Toxoplasmosis? That sounds pretty severe, doesn't it?
Toxoplasmosis is caused by a microscopic parasite that invades your cells and sets up shop there, living and stealing your nutrients so that it can live and multiply. It infects a wide range of hosts from humans to mice to cats. Although, like any spinster that smells faintly of urine and fish, it prefers cats. The scary thing about this parasite is that quite a high proportion of people are already infected with it. We're already infected. Around 40% of the US population is chronically infected, meaning that they've had it in their system for a while.
But what does it actually do in your system then?
Well, put simply, it makes cysts inside your muscles and nervous tissue, so little bags of tissue that contain parasites multiplying in pus and fluid. But it's nothing really to worry about. They're asymptomatic until chronic infection sets in.
Can you excuse me, please? I think I need a moment.
However, this isn't something to be worried about. Toxoplasmosis is asymptomatic, well, unless you have AIDS or are on drugs that suppress your immune system, because that's when the nasty side is likely to manifest.
Symptoms are again like in most of nature flu-like, with muscular pain, headache, fever and swollen glands showing up. However, in the chronic stage of infection, there can be remarkable inflammation of the brain. High levels of toxoplasma antigens present in areas of acute inflammation, meaning that where there's the most damage on the brain, the toxoplasma have left their spiky graffiti everywhere, identifying themselves like a squishy little street gang, only with less gun crime.
If you've got latent toxoplasmosis, and therefore you're walking around fine and normal, and a cyst just so happens to burst as a result of either getting too big or being struck by a physical force, then it can also activate the inflammation, leading to the brain-related illnesses.
So how do you end up getting toxoplasmosis then?
Well, ingesting their eggs, spores in which the young parasites are covered in a hard coating to protect them from the environment. If you eat them in infected meat, or if you get contaminated blood from a blood transfusion or transplant, you'll pretty much get it.
Oh God. Not finished yet.
When the spore gets into your system, the parasite inside matures and then hatches, like a tiny disgusting chicken. Only this chicken won't give you its delicious meats. No, the mature parasites wriggle through your cell linings, into your gut, and then get into all available tissues. If you're pregnant, women here listen up, not the men, then it can infect your baby by crossing through the placenta into the baby's blood.
But other than being generally gross, all the important stuff happens in the brain.
The parasite prefers to make cysts in your brain rather than in your muscles. It will invade your nerve cells and brain tissue where it gets your own cells to induce the immune system. It essentially sets up your brain cells like framing someone for murder, because the immune cell's response to the chemokine call that the worried cell puts out is to ignore due process and perform a summary execution of that and all other cells that might have seen, thus causing inflammation and brain damage.
As we've already mentioned, it's rather hard for infections to actually reach the brain. So how does Toxoplasma achieve this?
Well, in the muscular cells, this inflammation happens as well. So the immune cells turn up to find out what's going on, and Toxoplasma gondii manages to get inside and use the immune cell like a Trojan horse to get access to the brain. Think of how the facehugger implanted the egg in John Hurt in Alien so that it could get on the ship, but using your brain, and Sigourney Weaver isn't there to kill it off. The damage to the brain has been shown to have some interesting effects. It changes the behaviour of the host to best suit the parasite, so that it can spread to more organisms. And remember, it loves cats. Mice are afraid of cats because cats eat them. However, mice infected with Toxoplasma gondii suffer from massive brain damage that alters their behaviour. It turns them into ballsy morons that aren't afraid of the cat, so they crawl all over the cat's face, and then the cat eats them. Now the cat's infected. Now, humans like cats. Other than meat, this is how we can get toxoplasmosis. The cat builds up the spores in their stomach, and the spores that don't hatch, well, where are they going to go? Well, of course they're going to get pooped out. If you don't clear up after your cat often enough, well, you're more likely to be infected. Toxoplasma has been shown to affect human behaviour through the brain damage. But instead of letting domestic cats eat us, we respond in a different way. Men get more worried, jealous, and likely to kick off and murder people, as it makes them disregard the rules. In women, it makes them more intelligent, less guilty, and more promiscuous. It makes men and women alike more apprehensive. But there's nothing really to worry about. If you get it and it's diagnosed correctly, it's just some antibiotics in combination with maybe some anti-malarial drugs for you, and you'll be fine, and back to your normal, less disgusting self in no time.
Zombies spread their disease by biting people. Another disease that's greatly feared by society, that's also spread by biting, is of course rabies.
Rabies is a disease carried by canines. It's caused by a Lysa virus that infects dogs. In developing and continental countries that aren't separated from their neighbour countries by large bodies of water, rabies is a problem, with 40,000 people dying every year. Urban dogs in developing areas are the main source of human infection, with a direct link between dog population and human population density. Basically, the more people packed into a small area with a population of infected dogs, the more likely people are to get rabies. Seems pretty obvious, right?
Rabies is a problem in countries like Mexico, Brazil, and Central African countries like Chad. In these places, it's a low-level endemic disease, which means that there's a consistent and constant background level of infection amongst the human population. In these places, they also treat dogs, wild dogs and urban dogs, for rabies in order to try and countermeasure this fact. But a more cheap and effective way is to essentially just destroy a large percentage of the surplus dog population. It's a grim countermeasure, but it's very effective.
Humans get rabies from a simple animal bite. There are vaccines to combat the infection, but the most efficient is also the most expensive, coming from cell culture. As a result, most of the vaccines come from sheep, goat, or mouse brains, where the virus is grown and then weakened to elicit an immune reaction that will stimulate the innate immune response and help combat the real infection.
So how exactly does this virus work? And what happens when you're infected?
The rabies virus is a Lysa virus, belonging to the family Rhabdovirus. It has a single-stranded RNA genome, which means that unlike DNA-based viruses, it must first convert itself into DNA before it can copy. This viral RNA encodes 5 main proteins. Viral glycoprotein is a protein that becomes part of the external envelope that rabies wraps itself in, and is the main method of attaching and entering host cells. M2 is a protein that lines the envelope, giving it stability. Nucleoprotein becomes a part of the main viral particle, where the RNA genome is contained. Phosphoprotein M1 then lines the inside of that ball, and polymerase L sits inside.
The viral glycoprotein is essential for rapid infection and spreading through the nervous system. It was discovered that the component of this glycoprotein that made it lethal was
The tryptic peptides of the protein found at arginine 333, essentially a small segment of a long chain of amino acid blocks, was responsible for making a disease deadly to higher organisms. That's like those small 2x2 Lego blocks, and you make a long tower of them, but one of them is a tiny nuclear bomb. But you take away that bomb block, and it just goes back to being a Lego tower instead of a weapon of mass destruction.
Deep in the muscles, you find neuromuscular spindles. These contain sensory proprioreceptors, which are basically modified muscle cells wrapped up in unmyelinated nerve endings. This basically acts as an open door through which rabies virus can essentially walk into the nervous system and cause all of its trouble. If you get bitten by an animal, say a bat or a dog that's infected with rabies, you don't get super bat powers or become a werewolf. No, you just get a direct injection of deadly virus into exactly where it wants to be.
From this position, the virus then migrates to your brain along your nerve cells, where it causes inflammation of the ganglia in the brain. This movement from bite wound to spinal cord to your brain happens in a matter of hours. So, if bitten, it's important to go straight and immediately to the hospital for treatment. However, in the UK, it's never really been that much of a problem, thanks to geographical isolation and strict and stringent quarantine protocols.
In the brain, in the nerve cells, there's a high amount of viral budding occurring from the nerve cell's own plasma membrane. However, these cells are covered in a myelinated sheath, made up of Schwann cells that prevent infections from getting to the main body of the nerve. However, in this case, considering that rabies is already inside the main body of the nerve and is trying to get out, it traps any of the budding viral particles, preventing it from getting out into the actual main brain tissue. As a result of this, inflammation occurs, and the immune system once again haphazardly tries to deal with the situation. But this ultimately leads to quite a lot of damage and severe functional loss.
In the brain, the rabies virus builds up in the limbic system, the central most ancient part of your brain, linked to coordination and short-term memory. The damage here causes a loss of alertness, meaning that it's easier to scare people that are infected. It also causes a loss of timidity, meaning that when they are startled or scared, or just in normal conditions, the infected are more aggressive and more likely to try and bite your bloody face off.
But how does the virus spread through saliva if it's so intimately related to the brain?
The rabies virus is associated with sensory neuronal junctions, like the ones already mentioned in your muscles. There are many more of these sites throughout your body and some of your major sensory organs like your nose or your mouth. These sites can become targets of infection if you become intimately involved with an infected animal. You can get this infection without being bitten, but these cases are rare. Another association with these neuromuscular junctions is how the infection enters the saliva.
Remember that the virus buds from the surface of the nerve cell? Well, in the salivary glands, it does just this, and in a large amount, meaning that the mature virus is being pumped directly into the saliva. Then all that's needed is for the animal to bite someone, and the infected saliva gets pumped deep down into that bloody wound, transmitting the infection and passing on a deadly illness.
So now that we've established that the zombie apocalypse is something that can never happen, let's take a moment to think about what would happen if it did.
This zombie plague was sent by God to punish the queers.
This is the point where both the filmmakers and the Catholic Church would like to distance themselves from the opinions expressed by Father O'Brady O'Doherty O'Flanagan.
This plague is comparable to naught but the wrath of God. Sinners, repent ye crimes against God, and thou shalt be cleansed by his graces. Although, rationally speaking, like medicine and doctors and all, that's probably your best bet there, boy. Otherwise, those rotten bastards will probably bite your feckin' bake off. Pandemic modelling is a major component of how legislation is built to ensure that everyone doesn't get a nasty disease and doom the world. Pandemic modelling consists of gathering and collating information from surgeries and hospitals all over the world, then applying statistics to them to create an infection curve.
Truly riveting stuff. From this information, plans are then made with how best to contain and limit the impact of the disease based on projected case-to-death ratio, how the disease spreads, and whether the disease can develop into a deadlier strain. With all of this information, plans are made to stockpile drugs and how to give out the most effective care. Containment can be as simple as closing a school to prevent direct child-to-child infection. Ugh. Children, with their disgusting drooling faces and their stupid, despicable fluids. Oh, their despicable fluids. Hospital procedures are generally well adhered to, with liquid alcohol washes, disinfection, the use and proper disposal of gloves, all contributing to limiting the passage of infectious diseases. Doctors and nurses are generally well versed in this and are very good at it. However, a recent survey has shown that cleaners and secondary staff aren't quite as good at it.
Sociologist here with some information relevant to a scientific field. In the eventuality of a zombie apocalypse, the emotional factors that govern the behaviour of the individual will have gross knock-on effects to the mass population. For example, small-scale individual interactions will affect how people act and behave. Real-life examples would be panic buying, mass exodus, and all of those people that think that they're probably going to survive because they've seen too many movies, act like dicks, and then get killed.
So what does this ultimately mean?
Add all of this together, and what do you get? Well, you get a big group of slack-jawed morons that don't really know exactly what they're doing at all, who end up spreading the disease. All modelling has really shown us is that only a small percentage of society will survive, and statistically speaking, you're probably too stupid to be part of that percentage.
Only a quick and aggressive protocol of quarantine can limit the worst case scenario. Only frequent attacks of sufficient force will result in the eradication of the zombie populace, although this is unlikely as a result of all the namby-pamby ethical implications. All modelling shows that an outbreak will result in a global cataclysm. If we can't deal with them swiftly, they will eradicate us.
Well, that's all we've got time for tonight, I'm afraid. I hope that's left you with some food for thought. Brain food, that is. Ha 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 ha. You know, like zombies? What, you didn't like that? Well, it's not like I give a damn. Just think about this next time you're washing your hands, or you're making out with some rancid chick at a bar. And remember, always be vigilant to the non-existent threat of zombies. Thank you, and good night.